My husband looked at me and said I only married you to be my mom's maid. Nothing more. He laughed at my tears. What happened next made him regret every word he said. My name is Alexa, and I am 32 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and until that moment I believed I had a happy marriage. I was standing in my mother-in-law's kitchen, my hands still wet from washing dishes, when I heard my husband say those words to his friend on the phone. It felt like someone punched me in the chest. I could not breathe. Everything I thought I knew about my life suddenly crumbled. Before I tell you how I made him regret every single word, let me take you back to where it all began. But first, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. And if stories about strength, survival, and standing up for yourself resonate with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support means everything to me. Now let me share my journey with you. I grew up in a small town about 30 miles outside of Columbus. My father worked as an electrician, spending long hours fixing wires and installing systems in homes throughout the county. My mother was a nurse at the local hospital, pulling 12-hour shifts and coming home exhausted, but still finding the energy to cook dinner for our family. They were not wealthy by any measure, but they taught me something more valuable than money could ever buy. They taught me the importance of hard work, sacrifice, and putting family first. From a young age, I learned that love meant showing up for people. It meant doing the dishes even when you were tired. It meant staying late to help a neighbor fix their fence. It meant putting others before yourself because that was what good people did. I carried these values with me like a badge of honor, never questioning whether they might one day be used against me. I graduated from Ohio State University with a degree in marketing. It took me 5 years instead of 4 because I worked part-time throughout college to help pay my tuition. My parents offered to take out loans, but I refused. I did not want to burden them. After graduation, I landed a position at a small advertising agency in downtown Columbus. The pay was modest, but I loved the creative work and the tight-knit team I worked with. My dream was simple. I wanted a loving husband, a cozy home, and maybe 2 or 3 children running around the backyard. I imagined Sunday dinners with extended family birthday parties, with homemade cakes and growing old with someone who cherished me. I thought finding that person would be the hardest part. I had no idea that recognizing a wolf in sheep's clothing would prove to be the real challenge. I met Derek on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop near my office. I had just ordered my usual vanilla latte and was searching for a table when he collided with me. His iced coffee splashed across the front of my white blouse, leaving a dark brown stain that spread across the fabric like spilled ink. He was mortified. His face turned red and he grabbed handfuls of napkins, dabbing at my shirt while apologizing profusely. I remember laughing despite the situation because his panic was almost comical. He kept saying he was so sorry that he would pay for dry cleaning, that he would buy me a new shirt, that he was the clumsiest person alive. Derek was 34 years old with warm brown hair and an easy smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He worked as an accountant at a financial firm downtown, which explained his pressed khakis and button-down shirt. Everything about him seemed safe and dependable. He was the kind of man mothers dreamed their daughters would bring home. He insisted on taking me to dinner that evening to make up for ruining my shirt. I agreed partly because I found his earnestness charming, and partly because I was curious about this stranger who seemed so genuinely horrified by a simple accident. That dinner turned into a second date, then a third, and before I knew it, Derek and I were officially together. During those first 6 months, Derek was everything I had hoped for in a partner. He remembered the little things like how I took my coffee and which flowers were my favorites. He planned thoughtful dates from picnics in Schiller Park to cooking classes where we learned to make homemade pasta. He talked constantly about our future, about the house we would buy the children, we would raise the life we would build together. 3 months into our relationship, Derek invited me to meet his mother. I was nervous understanding how important this introduction was. I spent hours choosing the perfect outfit, a modest blue dress that was neither too casual nor too formal. I baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies to bring as a gift using my grandmother's recipe that had never failed to impress. Constance lived in a large 2-story house on the nicer side of town. The lawn was immaculately maintained, the hedges trimmed to perfection. Derek had told me that his father passed away when he was just 10 years old, leaving his mother to raise him alone. He spoke of her with reverence, describing her as a strong woman who had sacrificed everything for his well-being. When I met Constance, she was 62 years old, with silver hair styled in a perfect bob. She wore pearl earrings and a cashmere cardigan despite the warm weather. Her handshake was firm, her smile polite but restrained. She thanked me for the cookies without tasting them and offered me a seat in her formal living room, where plastic still covered the furniture. Throughout that first visit, I noticed how Constance watched me. Her eyes followed my movements as I sat, as I spoke, as I laughed at Derek's jokes. She asked questions that felt more like interviews. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? How much did I earn at my job? I answered honestly, perhaps too honestly, revealing my modest upbringing and middle-class salary. Derek squeezed my hand reassuringly whenever his mother's questions felt too probing. He later explained that she was protective of him, that she had trust issues after being widowed so young. He asked me to be patient with her, to give her time to warm up to me. I agreed without hesitation, because I understood family loyalty. I admired it even. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to the things I overlooked. The way Constance's smile never reached her eyes when she looked at me. The way she interrupted me mid-sentence to ask Derek if he wanted more tea. The way she mentioned casually but pointedly that Derek's ex-girlfriend had been a doctor. After a year of dating, Derek proposed. He took me to the same restaurant where we had our first dinner together, the one where he had tried to make up for ruining my shirt. He got down on one knee between the appetizers and the main course, presenting a modest diamond ring that he admitted he was still paying off. I said yes, immediately tears streaming down my face as the other diners applauded. Our wedding was small, just close family and a handful of friends gathered in a local church, followed by a reception at a modest banquet hall. I wore my mother's altered wedding dress, and my father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. It was everything I had dreamed of except for one small detail that I pushed to the back of my mind. During the ceremony, I noticed Constance whispering something to Derek just before he took his place at the altar. He nodded solemnly at whatever she said, his expression serious for just a moment, before he composed himself and smiled at me. I wondered what she had told him, but convinced myself it was probably just motherly advice or a blessing for our union. At the reception, Constance gave a toast that was technically complimentary but felt hollow. She spoke about Derek finding a wife who would take care of him, who would be devoted to family, who understood her role. At the time, I interpreted her words as traditional values similar to my own upbringing. I did not realize she meant them as a job description rather than a blessing. I walked into my marriage believing that I had found my person, my partner, my forever. I was so focused on the future I was building that I failed to see the trap that had been carefully constructed around me. The first month of marriage felt like an extended honeymoon. Derek and I settled into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment that we had chosen together. I would wake up next to him each morning feeling grateful for the life we were building. We cooked dinner together in our small kitchen, watched movies on our second-hand couch, and talked about our dreams late into the night. During those early weeks, Derek mentioned his mother more than I expected. He worried about her being alone in that big house. He wondered if she was eating properly. He suggested we visit her every Sunday for dinner, which seemed reasonable. Family was important, and I wanted to be a good daughter-in-law. Our Sunday visits started pleasantly enough. I helped Constance prepare meals in her kitchen, while Derek watched sports with imaginary friends who never seemed to materialize. I learned her preferences quickly. She liked her vegetables steamed, not roasted. She preferred her tea with exactly 1 sugar cube, not 2. She wanted the dishes washed by hand because she did not trust dishwashers. After 2 months of marriage, something shifted. Constance began calling our apartment during the weekday mornings, which struck me as odd since she knew I worked. When I did not answer, she would call Derek and complain that I was ignoring her. Derek would come home from work and gently suggest that I check in with his mother more often. The requests started small. Could I stop by after work to drop off groceries? Could I take her to her doctor's appointment since Derek had a meeting? Could I pick up her prescription from the pharmacy across town? Each favor seemed reasonable in isolation, but they began to accumulate like snowflakes in a blizzard. My supervisor at work noticed that I was leaving early more frequently. She pulled me aside one afternoon, her expression concerned. She reminded me that I had been a reliable employee for years, that she valued my contributions, but that my recent absences were affecting the team. I apologized profusely and promised to do better, then drove directly to Constance's house to help her rearrange her living room furniture for the 3rd time that month. When I expressed exhaustion to Derek, expecting sympathy, and perhaps an offer to help with his mother's demands, his reaction surprised me. His jaw tightened, and his voice took on an edge I had not heard before. He reminded me that Constance had no one else, that she had sacrificed her youth to raise him alone, that the least I could do was show some gratitude for being welcomed into their family. I apologized, confused about what exactly I had done wrong. I tried harder after that, waking up earlier, to complete household chores, before driving to Constance's house, then going to work, then returning to Constance's house after work, before finally coming home to cook dinner for Derek. My exhaustion became a constant companion that I learned to ignore. The romance between Derek and me began to fade like a photograph left too long in the sun. He stopped planning dates. He no longer asked about my day or listened when I talked about my work. Our evenings together consisted of him watching television while I folded laundry or prepared meals for the next day. We sat in the same room but existed in different worlds. I tried to rekindle our connection, suggesting weekend getaways or quiet dinners at restaurants we used to love. Derek always had an excuse. His mother needed him. Work was stressful. Maybe next month. The next month came and went with the same results. My 32nd birthday arrived on a crisp October morning. I woke up hoping Derek might have planned something special, even something small like breakfast in bed or a card with a heartfelt message. Instead, he informed me while brushing his teeth that he had to take his mother to a routine checkup that had been scheduled for months. I suggested rescheduling the appointment, pointing out that it was just a routine visit and could easily be moved to the following week. Derek's face hardened in a way that made me step back involuntarily. He accused me of being selfish, of not understanding the importance of his mother's health, of making everything about myself. That evening, Derek came home after 9 o'clock. He had forgotten to buy a cake. He had forgotten to buy a gift. He had forgotten, it seemed, that he had a wife at all. When he found me crying in the bathroom, mascara running down my cheeks, he stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. His words cut deeper than any knife could. He told me to stop being dramatic, that his mother needed him, that I was acting like a child. He did not apologize. He did not hold me. He simply walked away and turned on the television, leaving me alone with my tears and the growing realization that something was deeply wrong. I told myself I was overreacting. I convinced myself that marriage required sacrifice and that this was simply a difficult period we would eventually overcome. I loved Derek, or at least I loved the man I thought he was. I was not ready to admit that person might never have existed. 6 months into our marriage, I received a phone call that would change everything. Constance had fallen while reaching for something on a high shelf. She had broken her wrist and bruised several ribs. The hospital wanted to keep her overnight for observation, but she would need assistance at home for the following weeks. Derek did not discuss the situation with me. He simply announced that we would be moving into his mother's house until she recovered. He had already arranged for a friend to sublet our apartment. Our furniture would go into storage. This was not a request or a suggestion. It was a directive. I tried to voice my concerns about the arrangement. I asked how long we would be staying. I wondered about my commute to work, which would now be significantly longer. I suggested hiring a home health aide to help Constance during the day while we continued living in our own home. Derek dismissed each of my suggestions with increasing irritation. He accused me of not caring about his mother. He questioned whether I understood the meaning of family commitment. He reminded me that Constance had welcomed me into her home, and this was how I repaid her hospitality. By the end of our conversation, I felt like the villain for daring to have an opinion. We moved into Constance's house that weekend. I packed our belongings into boxes while Derek supervised, offering criticism rather than assistance. The drive to his mother's house felt like a funeral procession, though I did not yet understand that I was mourning the death of my own freedom. Constance had prepared a schedule for me, which she presented on my first morning in her home. She had written it on expensive stationery in her precise handwriting. The list detailed my responsibilities hour by hour from the moment I woke until the time I went to sleep. 5:30 in the morning, wake up and prepare breakfast for the household. 6:30, serve breakfast and clean the kitchen. 7, help Constance with her morning routine. 8, leave for work. 5 in the afternoon, return from work and begin preparing dinner. 6:30, serve dinner and clean up. 7:30, help Constance with her evening routine. 8:30, complete any remaining household chores. 10, prepare items for the next day. 11, sleep. I stared at the schedule in disbelief. I asked when I was supposed to have time for myself, for exercise, for seeing friends, for simply existing as a human being rather than a servant. Constance looked at me with cold eyes and reminded me that family members did not keep score. Derek stood beside his mother, nodding in agreement. The weeks that followed blurred together in an endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and caretaking. I scrubbed floors on my hands and knees because Constance did not believe in mops. I ironed sheets and pillowcases because she could feel the wrinkles when she slept. I prepared 3 different options for each meal because she often changed her mind about what she wanted to eat. Nothing I did was ever good enough for Constance. My cooking was too salty or too bland, never just right. My cleaning left invisible smudges that only she could see. My manner of folding towels was wrong, as was my technique for making beds, as was the way I arranged flowers in vases. She compared me constantly to other women. Her friend Margaret's daughter-in-law was a surgeon who still managed to cook homemade meals every night. Her neighbor's daughter-in-law had given up her career entirely to care for her husband's family. Why could I not be more like them? Why was I so selfish? Why had Derek chosen someone so inadequate? When I brought these concerns to Derek hoping for support, or at least understanding, I found only disappointment. He told me his mother had high standards because she had raised him alone after his father died. He suggested I try harder rather than complaining. He asked why I could not just be pleasant and make everyone's life easier. I began to lose myself during those months. The woman who had graduated from college while working 2 jobs, who had built a career from nothing, who had once had opinions and passions and dreams, slowly disappeared. In her place emerged a shadow who moved through the house, performing tasks without thought, without feeling, without hope. 8 months into our marriage, I lost my job. My supervisor called me into her office with a regretful expression. She explained that my performance had declined significantly over the past several months. I had missed deadlines, made careless errors, and been absent or late more times than she could count. The company had to let me go. I drove home in a daze, tears streaming down my face as I navigated the familiar streets. Losing my job felt like losing the last piece of myself that existed outside of Constance's house. Without my work, I had no identity separate from my role as unpaid caretaker. When I told Derek that evening, expecting perhaps some comfort or concern about our financial situation, I received neither. Instead, his face brightened with what looked almost like relief. He said that maybe this was for the best, that now I could focus on taking care of his mother full-time, that we would manage financially since he earned enough for both of us. Constance, overhearing our conversation from the next room, appeared in the doorway with a satisfied smile. She said she was glad I could finally focus on what really mattered. She handed me an updated schedule, this one even more demanding than the last, since I no longer had the excuse of employment to limit my availability. I looked at Derek, silently begging him to see what was happening, to recognize that his mother was treating me like hired help rather than family. He avoided my eyes and mumbled something about checking on dinner before disappearing into the kitchen. That night, lying in bed beside a husband who had already fallen asleep, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge what I had been denying for months. I was trapped in a situation I had not agreed to, serving people who did not respect me, with no money, no job, and nowhere to go. The walls of Constance's beautiful house felt like a prison, and I could not see any way out. The night that shattered my remaining illusions began like any other evening in Constance's house. I had spent the day cleaning the basement, a task I had been putting off because of the dust and heavy lifting involved. My back ached, my hands were raw from scrubbing, and I had not eaten since a hurried breakfast 10 hours earlier. I was in the kitchen washing dishes from dinner, my thoughts wandering to the load of laundry still waiting to be folded, when I heard Derek's voice drifting down the hallway. He was in his small home office, the door slightly ajar. I would not have paid attention except that I heard my own name. I moved closer, telling myself I was simply walking past on my way to get cleaning supplies. But my feet stopped outside his door, and I found myself listening to a conversation that would break me completely. Derek was laughing with someone on the phone, his voice light and casual in a way it never was with me anymore. He was talking to his friend Marcus, someone I had met at our wedding but barely seen since. Marcus apparently asked about how married life was treating him. Derek laughed again, that carefree sound I remembered from our early days together. Then he spoke the words that destroyed the foundation of everything I believed. He said he only married me to be his mom's maid. Nothing more. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. My hand reached for the wall to steady myself as Derek continued speaking each word, another nail in the coffin of my marriage. Marcus must have asked about love, about actual feelings, because Derek's response was dismissive. He asked what Marcus meant by love, then practically snorted. He said I was just convenient. He explained that his mom needed someone to take care of her, and I fit the bill perfectly. He described me as hardworking, not too smart, eager to please. He said I was basically the perfect candidate for the position. Tears rolled silently down my cheeks as I listened to my husband describe me like a job applicant, rather than a human being, like a product he had purchased rather than a woman he had promised to love and cherish. Derek continued explaining to Marcus that his mother had actually given him a checklist of traits to look for. Someone from a modest background who would be grateful for the marriage. Someone without too many career ambitions that would interfere with household duties. Someone with a caretaker personality who would put others first. He said I had checked every box. I do not know how long I stood there frozen by the magnitude of the betrayal I was witnessing. At some point, Derek ended his call and silence fell over the hallway. I should have walked away. I should have retreated to process what I'd heard in private. But something in me had finally cracked. I pushed open the door and stepped into his office. Derek looked up with an expression of mild surprise that shifted to annoyance when he saw my tear-streaked face. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not rush to comfort me. He simply leaned back in his chair and waited. My voice came out steadier than I expected when I asked if that was truly what I was to him. Just a maid. Derek shrugged an infuriatingly casual gesture given the circumstances. He said I heard what I heard, his tone flat and unapologetic. He seemed almost relieved, as if he had been waiting for this moment, eager to finally drop the pretense. I asked why he married me, my voice breaking on the words. I asked if anything between us had ever been real. Derek's explanation was clinical, delivered without emotion. His mother had been struggling to maintain her house alone. Hiring help was expensive and unreliable. She needed someone permanent, someone bound by family obligation to care for her without complaint. I was the solution to a practical problem. He admitted that the coffee shop meeting had not been entirely accidental. He had noticed me before, had watched me leaving my office building for weeks. He had learned my coffee order, my schedule, my routines. The collision was staged, the apologies rehearsed, the relationship choreographed from the very beginning. My knees buckled and I grabbed the edge of his desk to keep from falling. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my marriage, about myself, had been a lie. I was not a wife. I was an employee who did not know she had been hired. Derek watched my reaction with something close to amusement. He asked what I was going to do leave. He laughed a cold sound, nothing like the warm chuckle I had fallen in love with. He reminded me that I had nothing. No job, no money, nowhere to go. He said my parents were living on a fixed income and could barely support themselves. He asked where exactly I thought I would end up. His words were designed to crush me, to remind me of my powerlessness, to keep me compliant and trapped. And perhaps they would have worked on the woman I had become over the past year, the shadow, who moved through this house completing tasks without complaint. But something in his cruelty awakened the woman I used to be, the one who had worked 2 jobs to put herself through college, the one who had built a career through determination and talent, the one who knew her worth even if she had temporarily forgotten it. Before I could respond, Constance appeared in the doorway. She must have heard our raised voices, though I suspect she had been listening from the beginning. Her face showed no sympathy, no guilt for the role she had played in deceiving me. Instead, she looked at me with the cold satisfaction of a chess master who had finally captured the opposing queen. Constance told me that Derek chose me because I was hardworking and obedient. She said I should be grateful that anyone wanted to marry me at all. She described how she had searched for months before finding someone suitable. Someone without family connections that might interfere, someone desperate enough to accept whatever treatment she received. The word desperate echoed in my mind as I stared at this woman who had orchestrated my life like a puppet master. She was wrong about me. I was not desperate. I had been trusting, perhaps naive, certainly too willing to see the best in people. But I was not desperate. I turned and walked out of the office without another word. I climbed the stairs to the bedroom I shared with Derek, locked the door behind me, and collapsed onto the bed. The tears came, then huge, racking sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the future that would never exist. I cried for the woman I had allowed myself to become. But somewhere in the midst of that grief, something else began to stir. Anger, hot and righteous and clarifying. These people had used me, manipulated me, tried to break me down into nothing more than a servant. and I had let them. Not anymore. I remembered my father's words from when I was a teenager struggling with bullies at school. He had held my face in his calloused hands and told me that no one could define my worth but me. He said that people would always try to make me feel small, but I had the power to stand tall. I had forgotten that power somewhere along the way, buried it under exhaustion and manipulation and misplaced loyalty. But it was still there, waiting to be reclaimed. That night, as Derek eventually came to bed and fell asleep beside me without a word of apology or explanation, I stared at the ceiling and began to plan. I would not confront them again, not until I was ready. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me beg or plead. I would take back my life on my own terms, and when I was finished, they would understand exactly what they had lost. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I felt determination. The morning after everything fell apart, I woke before dawn. Derek slept soundly beside me, untroubled by the devastation he had caused. I watched him for a moment, searching his face for any trace of the man I thought I married. There was nothing there but a stranger. I slipped out of bed and made my way downstairs to begin my assigned duties, just as I had every morning for months. But this morning was different. This morning, every task I completed was part of a performance, a mask I wore while planning my escape. My first call was to my mother. I waited until Constance was occupied with her morning television programs, then retreated to the bathroom, turned on the shower for cover, and dialed the number I knew by heart. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice warm with surprise at hearing from me so early. I had not called her much lately, always too exhausted, always making excuses. Now I understood that my isolation had been deliberate, another way of cutting off my support system. I told her everything. The words poured out of me like water through a broken dam, months of pain and humiliation and degradation finally given voice. I told her about the schedule, the criticism, the endless demands. I told her about losing my job and how Derek had been pleased. I told her about the conversation I overheard about learning that my entire marriage was a calculated arrangement. My mother cried, which made me cry too. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs, for not asking more questions when I slowly disappeared from family gatherings and weekly phone calls. She wanted to drive to Columbus immediately to confront Derek and Constance to bring me home. I stopped her. I explained that I needed to handle this my way, that I had a plan forming, that I would not leave as a victim, but as a victor. My mother, who had raised me to be strong even when I forgot my own strength, understood. She told me she and my father would support whatever I decided. She told me she loved me. She told me I deserved so much better. That phone call gave me the first foundation I needed. My parents were with me. I was not as alone as Derek had tried to make me believe. Over the following days, I began collecting evidence. Ohio law allowed one party to record conversations without the other party's knowledge, a fact I verified through careful research at the public library during what Derek and Constance believed were grocery shopping trips. I downloaded a recording app on my phone and captured conversations that documented the treatment I received. I recorded Constance berating me for leaving a water spot on a crystal glass. I recorded Derek dismissing my exhaustion as laziness. I recorded both of them discussing me as though I were an appliance, rather than a person evaluating my performance and finding it wanting. I photographed the endless lists of chores Constance assigned me. I saved text messages from Derek that revealed his true feelings, the ones sent carelessly, when he thought I would never use them against him. I built a case piece by piece, documenting 12 months of manipulation and mistreatment. I also began reaching out to old colleagues, updating my resume during stolen moments, searching job listings on the library computers. My skills were still valuable, even if my confidence had taken a beating. 2 weeks after beginning my secret search, I received an email that made my heart race. A marketing firm larger than my previous employer wanted to interview me. The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I told Derek I had a doctor's appointment, a regular checkup I had been putting off. He barely looked up from his breakfast, waving dismissively as I gathered my things and headed out the door. I had stored a professional outfit in my car the night before, clothes I had not worn in over a year. I changed in a gas station bathroom, applied makeup for the first time in months, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was tired and thin, but there was fire in her eyes. The interview went better than I could have hoped. The hiring manager was impressed by my portfolio and my experience. She asked about the gap in my employment, and I explained honestly that I had been caring for a family member, but was now ready to return to work full-time. She nodded sympathetically and promised to be in touch soon. 3 days later, I received the job offer. The salary was higher than my previous position, with better benefits and a clear path for advancement. I accepted immediately, requesting a start date 3 weeks in the future to give me time to prepare. I opened a bank account at a different bank than the one Derek and I shared. I had a new email address that no one in that house knew about. I was slowly rebuilding the infrastructure of an independent life. Finding an apartment took longer. I needed something affordable on my new salary, close enough to my job to minimize commuting and available on my timeline. After visiting 6 different options, I found a small 1-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. The landlord agreed to let me move in at the end of the month, accepting my signed offer letter as proof of income. During this time, I continued playing my role in Constance's house. I cooked and cleaned and smiled when appropriate. I endured the criticism and the dismissive treatment. But inside, I was counting down the days. I also contacted a divorce attorney, a woman named Patricia, who came highly recommended by the Legal Aid Society. Our initial consultation was free, and Patricia laid out my options clearly. Ohio was an equitable distribution state, meaning I was entitled to a fair share of marital assets accumulated during our marriage. Given the circumstances and the evidence I had collected, Patricia believed I had a strong case. I signed the divorce papers in Patricia's office, the documents that would officially end my marriage to Derek. Patricia would file them the day I left, ensuring he received notification through proper legal channels. She assured me that everything was in order, that I had rights, that the law would protect me. The final pieces fell into place over those last weeks. I reconnected with old friends, women I had neglected during my marriage, and found them willing to help, despite my absence. My friend Sarah offered to be waiting outside Constance's house on the day I left, ready to drive me to my new apartment. Other friends volunteered to help me move furniture, stock my kitchen, rebuild my life. I chose the date carefully. My 1-year wedding anniversary fell on a Saturday. It seemed fitting that the day marking 1 year of deception should also mark my liberation. Derek and Constance would never forget the date, and neither would I. Everything was ready. I had a new job, a new apartment, a new bank account, with my first paycheck already deposited. I had documentation of everything I had endured, and a lawyer prepared to fight for my fair share. I had friends and family supporting me from the sidelines. Derek and Constance had tried to strip away everything that made me who I was. They had taken my job, my confidence, my sense of self-worth. But they had underestimated me. They had mistaken kindness for weakness, patience for submission, silence for acceptance. They were about to learn just how wrong they had been. My 1-year wedding anniversary dawned clear and bright, the October sun streaming through the windows of Constance's house with inappropriate cheerfulness. I had been awake for hours running through my plan one final time, ensuring I had not forgotten any detail. Derek woke late, stumbling downstairs around 10 in the morning, with no mention of the date or its significance. He did not wish me a happy anniversary. He did not present a card or a gift. He simply asked what was for breakfast, his voice carrying the same casual entitlement I had grown to despise. Constance appeared shortly after, her face pinched with its usual expression of vague dissatisfaction. She surveyed the kitchen, found a crumb on the counter that I had apparently missed, and launched into a lecture about cleanliness standards. I listened without responding, allowing her words to wash over me like water off a stone. After breakfast, I excused myself to get dressed. When I returned to the kitchen, both Derek and Constance stared at me with confusion. I was not wearing my usual uniform of old jeans and a stained t-shirt. Instead, I wore the professional outfit I had secretly purchased for this occasion, a deep red dress that fit perfectly and heels that added 3 inches to my height. Derek asked where I thought I was going. His tone suggested he already planned to deny permission for whatever I had in mind. Constance demanded that I change immediately and get started on the day's chores. She had a list prepared, of course, 3 pages of tasks that would take the entire weekend to complete. I looked at them both, these people who had stolen a year of my life, who had viewed me as a tool rather than a human being, who had laughed about their manipulation behind my back. I felt remarkably calm. I told them that today was our 1-year anniversary. I watched Derek's face flicker with something that might have been embarrassment as he realized he had forgotten entirely. Then I told them that it would be the last day I spent in this house, Derek laughed, that same dismissive sound I had heard through his office door months ago. He asked where I would go, what I would do, how I thought I would survive without him. He reminded me again that I had nothing. I reached into my purse and pulled out the divorce papers. I placed them on the kitchen table, the sound of paper against wood somehow louder than it should have been. I told Derek that I had a new job, a better one than my old position. I told him I had an apartment across town. I told him I had a lawyer who had already calculated my share of our marital assets. The color drained from Derek's face as he picked up the papers and began reading. Constance grabbed them from his hands, her eyes scanning the legal language with increasing alarm. I was not finished. I pulled out my phone and played a recording. Derek's voice filled the kitchen, explaining to Marcus that he had only married me to be his mother's maid. Constance's voice followed, describing how they had searched for someone suitable, someone desperate, someone they could control. The silence that followed the recording was absolute. Derek and Constance stared at me as though seeing me for the first time, and perhaps they were. The woman standing before them was not the compliant servant they had created. She was the person I had always been, the person they had tried to bury, but could never quite destroy. Derek attempted damage control. His voice shifted to the charming tone I remembered from our courtship, the voice of the man who had seemed so sincere over spilled coffee. He said he did not mean those things, that he was just venting to a friend, that he loved me, really. I stopped him before he could continue. I told him that I had heard him clearly, that I understood exactly what he meant. I told him that he should have considered the consequences before treating me like I was worthless. Constance tried a different approach. She accused me of being ungrateful after everything they had done for me. She listed the ways they had supposedly helped me, giving me a place to live, food, to eat, a role to fulfill. She called me selfish for abandoning them. I looked at this woman who had orchestrated my misery and felt nothing but pity. I told her that I was not ungrateful. I was simply finished being used. I told her that she would need to hire someone else to do her laundry and cook her meals and clean her floors. I told her that perhaps a paid employee would tolerate her criticism better than a daughter-in-law she never intended to respect. Derek grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. His grip was tight, almost painful desperation replacing the arrogance that had defined him moments earlier. He begged me to stay to talk about this, to give him another chance. I removed his hand from my arm finger by finger. I told him that he should have thought about consequences before treating me like nothing. I told him that I had given him a year of my life, a year of cooking and cleaning and sacrificing, and he had repaid me with mockery and manipulation. I told him that I deserved better, and I was going to find it. My suitcase was already packed and waiting by the front door. I had moved my important belongings out gradually over the past weeks, a few items at a time so no one would notice. The suitcase contained the last of my things, everything I needed to start fresh. I walked through the house one final time, past the kitchen, where I had spent countless hours, past the living room, where I had folded endless loads of laundry, past the formal dining room that I had polished until my hands cracked. None of it was mine, and I realized now that I had never wanted it to be. Sarah was waiting in her car at the end of the driveway, just as we had planned. She honked twice when she saw me emerge, a small celebration of my liberation. I did not look back at the house. I did not need to see Derek and Constance watching from the window. Their opinion of me no longer mattered. The drive to my new apartment took 20 minutes. Sarah talked the entire way, filling the silence with cheerful observations about the weather, and plans for a housewarming party, and suggestions for furniture stores that had good sales. I half listened, my mind still processing the magnitude of what I had just done. My apartment was small, but bright, with windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. Friends had helped me furnish it over the past week, moving in a second-hand couch, and a bed frame I had found at a thrift store, and kitchen supplies donated from various people who wanted to help. Sarah hugged me goodbye at the door, promising to check in tomorrow and the day after, and every day until I told her to stop. I watched her drive away, then turned to face my new home. My home, with my furniture, my rules, my life. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my second-hand couch, looking around at the bare walls that waited to be decorated. For the first time in over a year, no one was going to tell me what to do. No one was going to criticize my choices. No one was going to treat me like a servant in my own home. I had done it. I had escaped. The weeks following my departure were not easy. Healing never is. I woke up some mornings expecting to hear Constance's voice calling me to begin my chores, and the silence felt disorienting rather than peaceful. I reached for Derek in my sleep muscle memory, overriding emotional reality, and the empty space beside me brought fresh waves of grief. I cried more than I expected. Not for Derek, not really. I cried for the woman I had been before I met him, the confident and capable person who had somehow gotten lost along the way. I cried for the year I had wasted serving people who viewed me as disposable. I cried for the dreams I had built around a marriage that never actually existed. But gradually, incrementally, I began to heal. My new job provided structure and purpose. My colleagues were welcoming and professional, treating me as a valued team member rather than a servant to be ordered around. I threw myself into projects with the energy I had once devoted to Constance's endless demands, and the results were gratifying. My supervisor praised my work ethic and creativity. I started to remember that I was good at what I did. I joined a yoga class at a studio near my apartment. 3 evenings a week, I stretched and breathed and learned to be present in my own body again. The instructor talked about letting go of things that no longer served us, and I found myself releasing tension I had not even realized I carried. Muscles that had been clenched for months slowly began to relax. I reconnected with friends who had wondered where I had disappeared to during my marriage. They welcomed me back without judgment, understanding instinctively that I needed support rather than questions. We had brunch on Sundays and movie nights on Fridays, and long conversations over coffee that reminded me what genuine human connection felt like. My parents visited once a month, making the 3-hour drive from their home to spend weekends helping me settle in. My father assembled furniture and fixed the leaky faucet in my kitchen. My mother filled my freezer with homemade meals and my closet with practical items she found on sale. Their presence reminded me that I had always been loved, even when I had been too isolated to feel it. The divorce process moved forward steadily. Patricia kept me informed of each development, handling communications with Derek's attorney, so I did not have to engage with him directly. The recordings I had made proved valuable in negotiations, demonstrating clearly the nature of our marriage and my role in it. Derek contested nothing in the end. Perhaps his attorney advised him that fighting would only expose more of his behavior. Perhaps he simply wanted to be rid of me as much as I wanted to be rid of him. Whatever his reasons, the divorce was finalized 6 months after I left, with assets divided fairly according to Ohio law. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Derek had to hire a home health aide for Constance, someone who came 5 days a week and charged significant hourly rates. Constance apparently complained constantly about the quality of care, about how nothing was done properly, about how she missed having a daughter-in-law to help. The irony was not lost on me. Derek himself reached out twice in the months following our separation. The first time was a text message asking if we could talk, if I would consider giving him another chance. I did not respond. The second time was an email, longer and more apologetic, claiming that he had realized his mistakes and wanted to make things right. I deleted it without reading past the first paragraph. I was not interested in his regrets. I was not available for his redemption arc. Whatever soul-searching he needed to do was his journey, not mine. I had my own path to walk, and it led away from everything he represented. 1 year after leaving Constance's house, I received a promotion at work. I had been promoted to senior marketing manager, overseeing a team of 5 people and reporting directly to the vice president. The salary increase allowed me to move to a larger apartment with a balcony, where I grew tomatoes in the summer and watched the sunset in the evenings. I started dating again cautiously, at first treating each new connection as an opportunity to learn, rather than a desperate search for completion. I learned to recognize red flags that I had missed with Derek. I learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. I learned that being alone was preferable to being with someone who diminished me. Eventually, I met someone kind. His name was Michael, and he was a veterinarian with gentle hands and a genuine laugh. Our relationship developed, slowly built on friendship and mutual respect, rather than manipulation and hidden agendas. He asked my opinions and valued my answers. He supported my career without feeling threatened by my success. He treated me like a partner, an equal, a person worth knowing. But this is not a story about finding love again. This is a story about finding myself. The woman who emerged from that year of pain was not the same person who had walked into it. I was stronger in ways I had not known. I could be more aware of my own worth, less willing to sacrifice my well-being, for people who did not deserve my loyalty. I had learned to set boundaries and maintain them. I had learned to recognize when kindness was being exploited. I had learned that walking away from what hurt me was not failure, but survival. Some days I still think about Derek and Constance. Not with anger, not anymore. Anger requires energy better spent elsewhere. Instead, I feel a distant sadness for people so focused on using others that they could not form genuine connections. They had tried to break me down into a servant, and in doing so, they had revealed the emptiness of their own lives. If you are watching this and you recognize something familiar in my story, I want you to know that you are not alone. Perhaps you are in a situation where your value is constantly questioned, where your needs are consistently dismissed, where you have started to believe the lies people tell you about yourself. Perhaps you have forgotten who you were before someone tried to make you small. Remember this: no one has the right to define your worth. No one has the power to determine your future. The people who try to diminish you are telling you about their own limitations, not yours. It took me too long to understand that walking away was not defeat, but victory. Staying in a situation that destroyed me would have been the true failure. Choosing myself, valuing my own well-being, rebuilding a life on my own terms, that was the bravest thing I have ever done. I still have the recording of Derek's words saved on a hard drive somewhere. I do not listen to it anymore. I do not need to remember the exact syllables of his betrayal to honor what I overcame. The life I have built is evidence enough. Sometimes the hardest thing we will ever do is stand up for ourselves when everyone around us is telling us to sit down. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from what hurts us and walk toward the life we deserve. I am Alexa, and I refuse to be anyone's maid. That choice changed everything. Now I would love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when someone underestimated you? What gave you the strength to walk away from a situation that was hurting you? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched you in any way, please hit that like button and let me know. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss future stories about strength survival and standing up for what you deserve. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message today, please share this video with them. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. Remember that your worth is not determined by how others treat you. It is determined by how you treat yourself. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.